So I am honored to be joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Squamish Nation, specifically Nekwillicum, which is known today as Bowen Island. And Bowen Island, if you've ever been here, is part of a collection of islands called the Island Trust, who have unanimously committed to engaging in reconciliation efforts and establishing meaningful relationships with Indigenous people for whose land we live. Personally, for me, though, I think, I've lived here for 2.5 years now, and moving to Bowen Island really actually aligns with the beginning of my own reconciliation journey and understanding, just the parts I love that slide that Denise showed, that umbrella, like for the beginning of me starting to like learn about, wait a second, like how does this, I always learned about Indigenous people and issues as if it were something that happened in the past. And so, really starting to understand like what we learn about is not just a past issue, but very much a present issue and a future issue. And I've had this new surge of responsibility with the birth of my daughter, Meta, who is 5 months old, Denise. And really understanding that like now my role as a parent is to teach Meta what I didn't learn, right? I mean, like I grew up 15 minutes from a residential school and had no idea, right? Like that's not okay. And, so really understanding that like as a parent, I have this responsibility to teach Meta about what I didn't learn. But it kind of hit me the other day. And I'm just like, it's not just me learning, not just me teaching her, but also learning from her. She's growing up in a totally different community and society and understanding of this place that we call home. And so I just, personally, it has really hit me as a teacher and a learner now to learn from Meta and understanding that this place that we live and have settled is a part of our identity and something that we really need to understand. The other part about this, and I think it, just listening to Denise talk today, she said something about, the removal of barriers. And whenever I hear that, I'm always kind of brought back to the work of inclusive education, because that's exactly what it's about. And, the more that I learn about inclusion and the more that I, learn about reconciliation and actions to move forward, you realize that inclusion and reconciliation are, they are each other. They're not separated. Indigenous populations have been inclusive forever. This is not a new initiative. We are learning from people who have existed way before us. But as much as it's so important to acknowledge the land and to wear the orange t-shirts and to listen and to learn, I think part of the work of inclusion is also to take action to reduce and eliminate the barriers that has caused the historical and still very much present trauma in so many of the students that we're working with. So it's just really important, these conversations. And, I'm honored to be joining this conversation from the lens of disability, because I think that, these initiatives and these conversations just affect all of our kids. And whenever I feel uncomfortable about something that I'm learning about, because I have to unlearn it or it's different than what I know, I always think back to, but this is hard because we're dismantling a structure of oppression. This isn't just about learning about the past. It's also about how are we changing it for future generations. And so it's such an honor to be a part of this work. And so I thank you for joining us today. I will be posting everything that I share with you today on my website, the slides. I know that this is also being recorded. I will also have my slides available along with all of my resources, which I'm sure you've seen before, so I won't spend much time on this. Thank you, Leyton. The tweeting hashtag is out. So I was thinking about what I can talk about today, and I was kind of debating between two things, and I'm just like, hey, what have I talked about before? And so I'm going to actually talk to you about what I'm learning about right now. I'm doing a lot of work with IEPs and trying to figure out, how to make inclusion easier for people, and, knowing that the work is hard, but it's got to make life easier at the same time. And I keep coming up against these barriers, right? Like these barriers, like, why is this so hard? Why is inclusion so hard? And like, why Am I getting into Twitter fights? Why do I feel like I'm coming up against these fundamentally important issues that to me are like, this shouldn't even be a conversation, right? And I know that many people here have these same struggles around like, how do we do this? Why isn't this the norm? Why is this the exception? And how are we doing this? And I keep coming back to probably the biggest learning that I had to have in my thinking about inclusion, which was shifting away from looking at education and looking at our students through this kind of like colonial medical model that, you know, something is wrong with the students. And so I'm going to kind of tell you a little story about how this really got me. And of course, like I learned through metaphor. So I'm going to share with you this metaphor. What I'm really talking about here, and I'm speaking through the lens of disability, but this is not just about disability. Like I want you to think about all of our students who have historically been marginalized and oppressed. Like this, there's so much intersectionality in terms of, you know, like how kids are affected by these barriers that exist all around us. One of these big shifts in thinking are this idea away from this medical colonial model. But I have to kind of tell you how I started to understand this, okay? Everyone's heard about the medical model. Everyone's heard about the social model. But, you know, you can read about it. You can watch documentaries about it. But for me, how I truly understand something is by like an event that happens in my life, okay? So right before COVID, I get invited to speak in Hong Kong, which is really exciting. I've never spoken outside of North America. It was this huge conference. I pack up my wife because we're like, we are going to Hong Kong Disneyland. I'm super excited. I'm a very confident traveler. I book my hotels. I do all these things that I'm used to. And then I get to Hong Kong and I realize that there's some barriers. There's barriers that I'm not used to. The first barrier that I noticed was that I couldn't just rent a car, right? Like I didn't have the right driver's license. And even if I did, the guy at the counter's like, you probably don't want to drive here. And it actually worked out because the organization who booked me anticipated that, and they had a driver. They had a driver for me ready to go. And I'm like, wow, that was really nice that they anticipated my needs and I didn't have to be stranded and wait to figure out how I was going to get to my hotel, right? Like this idea of anticipating support. Another barrier was the language barrier, right? Like I don't speak the local language. And so everything was a little bit more difficult, right? Like ordering food was difficult. Navigating the conference hall was difficult. But the organization, guess what? They anticipated my needs. And they were like, you know what? Shelley's going to have a language barrier. Let's get her a translator. So here I have a driver. Now I have a translator. And I'm just like, whoa, this is fantastic. And then I actually get to the day where I'm presenting and I have a host. I have this lovely, lovely woman who's my host, and I wasn't feeling well, so she was running around getting me anti-nausea pills. Like it was amazing, and I felt so supported. I felt so welcome. I felt so supported. But when I left Hong Kong, I couldn't help but realize that was a lot of resources for one person. Like I basically had 3 EAs for one person, you know, and I couldn't stop thinking, because this is usually the conversation I have is, oh, there's not enough resources, not enough resources. Now, don't get me wrong, we need more resources, right? But I'm like, there's gotta be another way to meet need other than just adding people, right? Because 3 to 1 it's not realistic. I mean, they were fantastic. It was amazing. I felt so supported, but like, there's gotta be another way to meet needs that is a little bit more efficient. I mean, that was effective, but it wasn't efficient. So now I'm going to tell you another story. Okay, so this is still a travel story, but now I'm going to go to, actually, I'm going to hold that because I want to show you something. I'm going to show you something because this is really what we're talking about, these 3 bullets on the screen, right? Because what happened to me in Hong Kong and how I interpreted that experience was very much what I was used to doing for disabilities, right? Or actually not used to, what I started to do for disability, which is, you know, if I see a student with a disability who's struggling, I think, how can I support that student? You know, what even better, how can I anticipate the needs of that student, which is how I felt Hong Kong, the organization of Hong Kong met my needs, right? But the part that I started to realize, and Michael Waymeyer is a very excellent excellent researcher who helped me understand this, was just like, well, wait a second. Like, what if it wasn't me that was having the problems? Like, what if there's like these barriers in the environment? Like, so like the language barrier for something, like I can't in that moment change my language, right? But then what Michael Waymeyer says, he says, what if we pay attention to the context instead of the person, how does that affect the resources that an individual needs? Okay, so I'm going to kind of show you this visually, like what the literature says, and then I'm going to connect it to what happened to me in my life. Okay, so what we're talking about here are two different models. Leyton, can you just tell me what time I'm finished at in the chat box so I can keep track of that? So when we're talking about the medical model of disability, okay, what we're talking about is if you have a place, now this could be a community, this could be a school, this could be a classroom, just any kind of place, and there is a student or a person in that place who's not being successful, how we were all taught to respond to that person is something is wrong with them. Right? A student is having challenging behavior. A student is having anxiety. A student is not meeting their reading benchmarks. We have been taught, and it's been ingrained into our head, that something is wrong. Thank you. Something is wrong with this kid. And so what we were taught to do is, well, we need to find out what's wrong. Now, historically, how we find out what's wrong is we send them down the hall or to another program or to another teacher to be assessed. To find out what's wrong. Then we find out what's wrong. We create an individual education plan that fixes them, and then they could go back into the classroom. Beautiful. But this model was designed for not inclusive settings, right? And so we're trying to use the same system to work with kids who are in classrooms who have a lot of other needs. And so like, we're in this like mindset that every student who's not successful needs to have a plan to fix them. And this is just so problematic. And so if we look to how the disability community feels about this, well, the disability community says, wait a second, hi, I'm not broken. Here I am. I'm fine just the way I am. What if I don't need to be fixed? What if my learning disability makes me unique? What if my ADHD helps me to do many things at once? I'm just thinking about myself here. So like there's got to be another way that we can still meet the needs of these kids without this like this medical process. Like you go to the doctor when something is wrong, right? Like a physical, like a broken bone, getting broken bone fixed is completely different than how we should be supporting a student with a learning disability or a student who's navigating trauma or a student that's having anxiety. Like these are totally different processes, but we've been trained to respond to these kids according to this medical process. So a response to this is the disability community is just like, hey, wait a second, I'm not broken. Y'all are broken. What if the reason why I'm not having success is not because there's something wrong with me, but because there's something around me that's preventing me from being successful? So this is the social model of disability. And so what this advocates for is, well, how about instead of diagnosing the problem in the student, why don't we diagnose the problem in the environment? And the benefit of doing this is that if you support and put resources into the environment, you're going to help everyone in the environment, not just the person who's not having success. But then teachers were like, well, wait a second, my kids aren't all the same. Like if this is a garden, this is like the garden metaphor, right? You have a plant that's not thriving. You don't just pull out the plant. You have to look at the soil. Like, does it have enough water? You have to look at the conditions. Does it have enough light? But what if you have a cactus and a daisy and an eggplant in the same garden? Throw in a hosta. All of those plants need different things. So then what do we do? And so this is where Michael Waymeyer steps in. He's just like, okay, well, what if we have like a combo? Okay. What if we say, okay. What if we say, let's look at both the place and the person, but we have to stop looking at disability, because if we stop looking at disability as what we need to respond to, it frees it up to be an identity like all other identities: gender, language, culture, ability, and disability. Okay. Oh, Vicky says, let's explore the term success, thinking about what success looks like and what we were defining, totally, and how we redefine. That's an excellent point, Vicky. So we have the person place model of need, which says, okay, if there are kids who are struggling, okay, if kids are having a hard time in a place, whatever that means and whatever that looks like, what Michael Waymeyer suggests is, okay, let's look at the context first. What do all of the plants need? All plants need water, all plants need light. Let's look at the whole community first and say, what can we put into place that will reduce as many barriers as possible for as many students? What this is going to do is reduce the crisis that so many kids are feeling, so many teachers are feeling, but we can't actually do this if all the resources are going into supporting crisis and individuals. Take a step back. Let's look, how do we wrap our arms around this whole community? Once we do that, then we can look at individual needs above and beyond. But notice I'm saying needs, not disabilities, okay? Because when you take a step back and say, how do I support need? Everyone has needs. But if you say, how do I support autism? That's going to be one student, right? And autism isn't the need, right? Maybe someone with autism needs support with communication. Maybe someone with autism needs support around like navigating sensory experiences. And it's not about fixing them, it's about how do we navigate those things. But it's really looking at how our resources are not just going into looking at how do we make kids with disabilities fit into the system, but taking a step back at the whole community and saying, how do the kids with disabilities here, what are their needs, and how do those needs connect to the other needs of the class, and how do we support everybody in this classroom? A lot of people then ask me, well, then what's the point of an IEP? I'm like, well, what if an IEP wasn't about fixing a student? What if an IEP was about communicating to a teacher what the barriers are and what the needs are, not what the disabilities are, what the needs of a student is, and specific supports and strategies that can be implemented universally for the community, for the context. How do we reduce barriers in the context instead of specific accommodations for an individual? Like, do you see how just taking a step back and being like, we can still design for individuals, but we can implement for a whole community. Like, this is huge because we're supporting everybody. We're supporting everyone in that place. And so what's my time? Okay, I have 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you this fast. So you may have heard this before. Yes, social model, person, place, model, Michael Waymeyer, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to tell you how I understood this, okay? So I'm traveling around, as you know, going to Hong Kong. Well, this other place that I go, Phoenix, there's another barrier. I'm going to tell you. This has probably even happened to you before. So when I travel, I like to rent cars, right? I rent a car. And so I'm in Arizona and I rent a car. And this doesn't just happen to me in Arizona, but this is where the event happened. When you rent a car in America, what do you, tell me in the chat box, what do you have to do when you rent a car before you drop it back off at the place, at the airport? What do you got to do to the car? You fill it up. Thanks, Grady. Yeah, you put gas in it. No problem. You want to top it off, right? Because you don't want to get, Maria always forgets. Well, so the problem though in America is if you want to fill up, you can't. Francois, yes. You go to a gas pump in America to fill it up and you put in your credit card and you can't, because the first thing it asks you at every gas pump in America is, what is your darn zip code, Joanne? Yes, exactly. So Maria, I have tried 90210. I have tried 00000. It works. 90210 worked once. 02, there's all the zeros that worked a couple of times. But here's the reason why it's in place is because it's an anti-fraud strategy. So if you actually go to like a major chain, they ask you to put in the zip code because it has to match the zip code on the credit card you're using. Okay, so unless you have an American credit card, it's not going to work 99% of the time. Okay, this makes me livid. I don't have time for this. So let's just look at this from the medical model. Okay, so from the medical model, I'm the problem. Okay, I am not meeting the goal. In this example, success means that I'm paying for and filling up gas and dropping off my car. So I'm the problem. I can't do it. I can't do it. So now let's make an IEP. Shelley will fill up her car with gas 90% of the time with 90% accuracy. That should say June 2022. And I will do this by using an individual strategy. So here's the first problem is SMART goals, because this looks at the frequency. The frequency of me putting gas in the car actually has nothing to do with the problem. The problem is that I don't have a zip code, and I can put gas in my car 300,000 times and it'll still be the same problem, which is why SMART goals are really problematic. Okay, so here are some strategies. I can pay with cash. Who has cash? So then I have to go to an ATM, take out cash, but now I have to pay an extra fee. So what are the resources? I need extra time and I need extra funding to be able to meet that goal more than anybody else who fills up with gas. Okay, so I could use my credit card, but I have to prepay. So I go prepay. I have to guess how much gas I need. It's never exact. So then I go in and I have to get my change. So I go into the guy. This is Arizona. I'm like, hey, can I get my change back? He's like, yeah, no problem. I'll just put it back on your card. It'll take 6 to 8 weeks to process. So what's a resource that I need? I need extra time. So all of this is extra resources in addition to everyone else who's filling up with gas. Resources. I'm going to tell you what I really need resources for, and it's the challenging behavior that I have because I think this is ridiculous. So in Arizona, I go to the guy. I want you to listen very carefully to this conversation. I go to the guy. I don't have a zip code. He's like, well, get a zip code. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I will never have a zip code because it's against my identity. I'm Canadian. I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I just don't have a zip code and I'll never have a zip code. He says to me, that's not my problem. And I'm like, wow, it's not a very good business model. You're going to lose some customers pretty fast. He looks at me. I'll never forget it. He's just like, we get maybe 1 Canadian a week. Maybe on busy weeks, 2. Are you ready? This is what he says. Why would we change everything for 1 or 2 people? How many of you have heard that? If you're a parent and have heard that, you know exactly how that feels. Because in that moment, I'm like, but there's nothing wrong with me. You're the problem. You are losing customers because you're not responding to the needs of Canadians, right? Now, I want you to think about that from the disability perspective, because kids and families hear that all the time. They hear, why would I change my planning for 1 student? Why would we change our school for 1? They hear it all the time. And in those moments, they feel, but there's nothing wrong with my kid. But there's nothing wrong with me. You're going to lose them. I haven't gone to the punchline. Okay, ready? So I'm going to show you. I go to Vermont. Vermont, I don't have time. I don't have time to get to the airport and just not pay, or just get them to pay it. I see a sticker in the corner of the gas tank, and it catches my eye because it's got a flag. Look at, take a picture. You're gonna be in Hawaii after COVID and be like, what was that sticker? Look at this. English and French, people. Instructions for Canadian credit card users if prompted to enter a zip code. Okay. So what this is called a zip code strategy, and it helps you turn your postal code into a zip code. So you pull out the numbers of your zip postal code and then add 2 zeros. Okay. So I'm D0N1G1. So my zip code is 01100. And it works because it matches my credit card. And this blows my mind. And I'm like, what? Why isn't this on every gas tank? So then I asked the guy across me, I'm like, hey, did you know about the sticker? And he goes, oh, well, I'm American. I don't need it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, yeah, no, I've seen this before, but I don't really need it because I'm not Canadian. I'm just like, oh, so let me just get this straight. You had access to the sticker, but you didn't use it because you didn't need it? Just think about it. I didn't have to go to a different gas station. I didn't have to go to a different pump. I didn't have to prove that I was Canadian to see the sticker. This sticker probably cost 2 pennies to print. And okay, I'm sending you to a breakout room, but this is what we're trying to do, right? This sticker, Vermont anticipated the Canadians. They put a sticker.
Great. So Shelley, do you have a prompt for us for our breakout room conversation?
Yes, I was going to be like, what are our zip code strategies? What are the zip code strategies that we can put into our classroom, anticipating the needs of our kids that are just available for anyone, that don't require more resources, but just help everyone to be successful?
Great. So we're going to head to breakout rooms for about 8 minutes, everybody. Just have a little chat about what are some of the ways that you're creating access for everybody in your own contexts. We'll see you in 8 minutes.